We have all heard the phrase, at any point in Alpha 2 you're playing the worst version of the game than it will ever be. The idea is simple, things will only get better over time. But Phase 2.5 made me stop and think, is it actually true? I'm Flanker, and today we're going to take a close, honest look at what exactly went wrong with PvP, why it happened, and what can be done to fix it. Before we begin, I'd be very grateful if you support my small channel by liking the video and subscribing. Ashes of Creation is meant to be a PvX game. A number of recent changes, both directly and indirectly, have led to what is probably the lowest level of PvP activity we've seen so far. And now we're going to analyze them one by one. The first major factor was the noticeable drop in the number of guild wars. Obtaining even a Novice War declaration scroll now requires more stabs and come at a significantly higher cost. On top of that, there is an 18-hour cooldown for each of the 3 available charges. Guild wars as a gameplay loop are closely tied to another system, guild progression. Since that system is currently unfinished and unbalanced, not many guilds actively engage with it, especially in alpha environment where a full wipe is expected before phase 3. As a result, larger guilds often split into several sub-guilds, which becomes a simple and obvious workaround. This leads to complications. When 2 large guilds find themselves in a position to start a war, their raids might often consist of members from multiple different guilds, making it much harder to initiate a proper guild war. In the end, it requires multiple scrolls, which, as we've mentioned, are not cheap. As a result, situations like world boss spawns, contesting a named mob, or fighting over a farm spot almost always boil down to a boring DPS check instead of an actual fight. Which kind of brings us to another issue, and that is natural open world PvP is also relatively rare, and there are a few reasons for that. First, it's simply very risky, not just because you might lose the fight and drop some resources, but also due to the high chance of accidentally becoming corrupted. The setting that prevents you from attacking non-combatants while flagged is not reliable at all. There have been plenty of cases where someone's unflagged mount got accidentally killed, which is exactly why summoning a low HP mount has become a common method for corruption baiting. Secondly, when a purple player doesn't attack anyone for a while, their nameplate starts blinking, signaling that they will soon be back to non-combatant state. However, I've seen multiple instances where players unintentionally became corrupted in these situations. And the issue wasn't about the killing blow landing after the enemy's nameplate turned white. The actual reason is the fact that this mechanic apparently doesn't work properly as well. If we had statistics with a breakdown between intentional and accidental PKs, I wouldn't be surprised if the number of accidental ones was higher. Finally, players often have no real reason to fight back when someone flags and tries to initiate PvP. There's almost no chance the aggressors will risk going red, since the corruption system is completely overtuned. Pretty much nobody in their right mind is going to kill another player while risking the loss of 1 to 3 equipped items. To summarize this chapter, the current state of the open world PvP and PK systems is yet another reason why this phase is lacking meaningful PvP. According to Steven, the system was inspired by Lineage 2, where it worked well and served its purpose. Open world PvP was common and griefing was rare, but you cannot expect the same results in Ashes when the system is both broken and overtuned. Additionally, when players have no reliable way to contest a spot, it often leads to other consequences such as mob training or simply bringing more people to win another boring DPS check. Is it fun? Absolutely not. Throughout Phase 2, caravans were probably the biggest source of low and mid-scale PvP. Unfortunately, several factors contributed to the decline of this gameplay loop as well. First of all, for many months and up until recently, it was possible to simply despawn a caravan by closing the game if it was under attack. Sometimes it disappeared instantly, sometimes after 10 minutes, but in either case, the balance between risk and reward was seriously broken. In Phase 2, the situation got even worse when journeyman carpentry became available and various types of caravan armor were unlocked. As a result, caravans often had over 1.2 million HP, along with high armor and magic resist, which in most cases made them nearly unkillable within the 10-minute window. On top of that, traveling as a small convoy of 3 to 5 caravans reduced the risk even more, since attackers could at best destroy only one of them in time. I remember our group catching 2 caravans in the desert, we barely managed to destroy one, even though there were 8 of us and we all had very good gear. The second caravan, of course, was despawned. Fortunately, this exploit has been fixed recently, but I'm still wondering why it literally took months to address such a serious issue. There was absolutely no balance between risk and reward, the gameplay loop never reached its full potential, and on top of that, it directly fueled inflation. During Phase 2, a good caravan run could bring in around 120 gold with virtually zero risk, which is terrible for the in-game economy and a dream come true for RM tiers. The first month of Phase 2.5 was even worse. After the TTK changes, players' damage output naturally dropped, which meant it took significantly more time to kill a caravan. On top of that, caravans had HP regeneration and were completely immune to status effects. And trust me, things will only get worse once caravan armor becomes available again. The second factor that contributed to the decline of Caravan PvP was the ability to destroy your own caravan by talking to an NPC. This feature was introduced in Phase 2 as a temporary solution for cases when caravans got bugged, so players wouldn't have to wait for the next server restart. However, solving one problem created another. In hopeless situations where the caravan was clearly going to be lost, some players simply destroyed it through the caravan master. As a result, attacking a caravan started to make even less sense since the chance of actually getting a reward became minimal. I remember reporting this after the very first case many months ago, and to be completely honest, I'm not even sure what surprises me more at this point. The fact that it still hasn't been fixed, or the fact that no one foresaw that players would obviously exploit it. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to be smart in hindsight, that's not the point. What I'm saying is, it would make a lot of sense to ask the question like, if this change is implemented and I'm a bad actor, how could I take advantage of it / exploit it? Looking at design decisions from that angle could not only help prevent obvious mistakes, but also save a lot of time on fixing them later, and obviously avoid the backlash from the community. The third factor that influenced the situation was an item called the crowbar. After a caravan was destroyed, cargo crates would drop to the ground, and literally anyone with a crowbar could instantly open and loot them. I'd consider this more of an indirect factor, but it still plays a role when deciding whether or not to attack a caravan. And sure, there are certain tricks you can use to reduce the chance of this happening, but why is it even possible in the first place? An obvious temporary solution could have been to change how crowbars work so that opening a crate wouldn't be instant but would, instead, take some time. Another factor was the fact that obtaining caravan components in Phase 2.5 became significantly harder, and as a result, fewer players are using them. Don't get me wrong, I fully support the decision to remove them from vendor sales. Caravan components should absolutely be crafted and sold by players, not by NPCs. However, the amount of resources required to craft them has now reached absurd levels. For example, a basic tier 2 carriage now requires 80 weeping willow instead of 20, and for tier 3 this number is 160. To make matters worse, the stats of certain caravan components are currently bugged. Dragon Tree caravan parts are supposed to be identical to Weeping Willow components, and while carriages seem to be fine, the chassis and wheels have incorrect values. One of the developers even confirmed on stream that this isn't intended, which makes me wonder, how difficult can it be to adjust the stats of just a couple of items, especially when they actually matter quite a lot? Last but not least, I have no idea what problem this change was supposed to solve or how exactly it was meant to improve the game. Someone suggested it might have been aimed at addressing speed hackers, but I'm not sure if that is the best way to go about it. What I do know for sure is that organizing guild caravan runs is now definitely going to become a pain in the ass. And beyond that, this also impacts the number of opportunities to raid caravans. If I cannot use a beacon to summon mine just to pick up cargo, then there really aren't many reasons left to attack them in the first place. At this point, you are probably wondering why a video about PvP is spending so much time talking about caravans. Well, as I mentioned earlier, at the start of Phase 2, caravans offered a great and potentially endless gameplay loop with meaningful, objective-based PvP. Sure, there were some bugs and flaws, but it was closer than ever to actually fulfilling its purpose. In Phase 2.5, the situation has changed, and unfortunately, not for the better. What's more, the number of caravan encounters will naturally keep decreasing over time, simply because the map keeps expanding and the chance of running into one drops significantly. That said, this doesn't mean the issues we have mentioned should not be addressed. In fact, the opposite. They need attention now more than ever. Node sieges, as one of the endgame loops, are still far from their final form. And I'm not even talking about siege weapons yet, though I was glad to see the ballista listed among the new items on Ash's Codex. The main issue remains performance during those massive 100v100 battles. Sure, it's improved compared to the very first siege on the PTR, which I had the pleasure of experiencing, but it's still far from where it needs to be. I woke up in the middle of the night to take part in the first siege of New Ayla this phase, and regretted it pretty quickly. There was some cautious optimism beforehand, since a few players mentioned that the most recent Node Siege PTR test went surprisingly well. Unfortunately, that progress didn't quite make it to the live servers. That said, I'm not overly concerned yet. Node Sieges aren't supposed to be frequent events, and if Intrepid successfully implements dynamic reading, the performance issue might resolve itself. For now, all we can do is wait and hope for the best. Phase 2.5 kicked off shortly after the addition of the new biome June Dark. Since no nodes had been placed there, it effectively became a lawless zone, and for a while, players could find PvP action there almost 24/7. However, just like what happened with Desert and Tropics before, June Dark eventually received its next round of updates and lost its lawless status. This time though, the player backlash was much louder. So why were people so vocal about it this time compared to similar situations in the past? I believe the answer lies in everything we've covered so far in this video: the lack of properly functioning PvP loops. Personally, I consider myself more of a PvX player and don't mind doing both PvE and PvP. But most of the actual PvP I experienced this phase happened during organized scrims or training sessions, and that's not how it should be in a game that promises open world PvX gameplay. Of all the issues we've discussed today, I'd like to highlight the three most critical ones: caravans, open world PvP, and guild wars. The caravan system needs to return to what it once was, a dynamic and rewarding core gameplay loop that offered real stakes for everyone involved. I genuinely do not understand why progress sometimes follows the pattern of one step forward, two steps back. Of course, I perfectly realize that not every idea ends up being an improvement, and every improvement was just an idea at some point. But at the same time, some decisions are so obviously counterproductive that I'm left wondering how they were greenlit in the first place. Corruption and open world PvP also need serious attention, and not during beta, but ideally during phase 3. Dropping up to 3 equipped items is absolutely insane, especially when there is a real risk of going corrupted accidentally. A much more reasonable approach would be a gradually increasing chance to drop a piece of gear based on how much blight a player has accumulated. And the ability to reduce corruption by killing mobs should be more than just a theory, it should actually work. The amount of corruption a player carries should also be clearly visible, just like karma in Lineage 2. Because, once again, you cannot expect a system to function as well as it did there if literally everything about it has been fundamentally altered, leaving behind only the name. Guild wars aren't supposed to be that hard to declare. At the same time, I understand they shouldn't be easily spammable either. That could lead to large guilds bullying smaller ones without consequence. So instead of the current system with 3 limited charges, why not implement a declaration cooldown per guild? For example, if Guild A declares war on Guild B, a 3-day cooldown could be applied before they can do it again. However, if Guild B initiates a declaration during that time, Guild A's cooldown would reset. This would limit potential griefing through spam, while still allowing both sides to keep fighting as long as they want to. As for world bosses, they are supposed to have PvP zones around them, period. Killing them currently feels like a chore, and no matter how many mechanics you add, it's going to stay that way. Sure, it might be exciting 2, 3, or 5 times, but after that, it's all the same. The only way to make them a fun, repeatable gameplay loop is to add a PvP element, just like Steven mentioned during the Firebrand showcase on the dev livestream. The reason world bosses were always super fun in Lineage 2 is because there was always a massive PvP, sometimes lasting for hours, before the farm. And in any case, what I know for a fact is that the world bosses definitely shouldn't be a boring DPS race. Finally, Lawless Zones. Yes, I know the ocean is supposed to be one, and I'm aware that lawless areas were initially meant to be an Alpha 2 only feature. But maybe, just maybe, it is worth reconsidering. Would it really be such a terrible idea if each biome had one location or dungeon with unrestricted PvP? Take Befallen Forge in Riverlands as an example. It has solid gear drops and players have plenty of reasons to farm it. Turning it from a regular point of interest into a battleground could create intense, meaningful conflict, something guilds would actually fight for and contest. On top of that, if I recall correctly, the forge only has one entrance. That could be easily modified with a portal or similar mechanic to limit access for high-level players and keep things fair. Once again, don't take this literally, it's just a concept. But I'd really like to know what you guys think about it. This doesn't just apply to the Befallen Forge example, it goes for everything we've discussed in this video. Share your thoughts in the comments and kindly let me know what you agree or disagree with. If this video was interesting, please consider supporting my channel by leaving a like and subscribing. I am Flanker, and I'll see you soon.